My name is Daniel Hayes, and 11 years ago, my brother made sure the world knew I was nothing. One punch to my jaw at a family barbecue, his rich wife spitting in my face calling me Trish. Then silence. No birthdays, no calls, no family. They lived rich. I starved. I slept in my truck outside gas stations, ate from vending machines, and broke my back in warehouses while they raised their glasses in warm homes. For them, I was dead. But pain doesn't just destroy, it forges. Every insult, every empty stomach, every night staring at a ceiling I didn't own, I turned into fire. And brick by brick, I built a life they could never imagine. From a broken mattress on the floor, to a CEO's desk, from hunger to an oceanfront mansion. Yesterday, for the first time in more than a decade, they showed up. My brother, the same man who called me trash, grinning with a suitcase in hand. His wife smiling that same poisonous smile. We just need a place to stay, they said. I didn't argue. I didn't forgive. I just smiled and locked the gate. But that was only the beginning, because when betrayal crawls back to your door, revenge doesn't whisper, it roars, and the only question left is, would you have opened the gate or slammed it shut forever? My name is Daniel Hayes. I was 26 years old that summer, drifting between odd jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, and still trying to believe that family might one day see me as more than a shadow at the edge of their gatherings. I wasn't proud of my life then, but I still carried a stubborn hope that if I just showed up, if I just kept trying, maybe things would change. Maybe blood would matter more than judgment. That Sunday afternoon in Charleston was hot enough to make the air shimmer above the grill. Caleb's backyard was filled with the usual uncles sweating through their shirts, cousins chasing each other across the patchy grass, and the smell of ribs burning while someone swore they knew what they were doing. I walked in carrying a store-bought box of cookies, the kind wrapped in cheap plastic, and set it down on the picnic table. It was all I could afford, and I told myself it was enough, though I knew the moment Venus saw it, she'd turn it into a performance. She didn't wait long. "Oh, Daniel," she said in that sugar-soaked tone, smiling wide enough for everyone nearby to hear the words that followed. "Unemployed again, huh? Must be nice, all that free time." A ripple of awkward laughter passed through the group. My ears burned. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them freelancing wasn't the same as doing nothing, but the words stuck in my throat. Caleb was already on his second or third beer, and when Venus tilted her head toward him, he didn't hesitate. "She's not wrong," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. "You float in for the food and vanish the rest of the year. Always been that way." His eyes were glassy, but his voice carried weight. He knew how to wound me with a single sentence. I clenched my jaw, searching for a reply, when he took a step closer. "Trash," he said, letting the word hang like smoke in the humid air. "Trash like you doesn't belong in this family." His voice cracked, half anger, half intoxication, but the venom was real. I barely had time to breathe before his fist came. The punch landed square on my jaw, sharp and shocking. Pain exploded across my face, and the box of cookies tumbled from my hands, scattering cheap treats into the grass. I stumbled, catching myself against the edge of the picnic table, but not before something else clattered to the ground. My father's old pocket watch, worn silver and cracked, slipping from Caleb's shirt pocket in the scuffle. For a moment, no one moved. The laughter, the chatter, the smell of grilled meat, all of it seemed to freeze. I looked around, hoping someone might speak, might stop this madness, but the cousins looked at their shoes, the uncles refilled their cups, and my sister-in-law just smiled, thinly satisfied. Only my mother stirred. Evelyn bent down, picked up the watch with trembling fingers, and for an instant her eyes met mine. They were heavy with something, shame, maybe sorrow. but she looked away before I could know for sure. She placed the watch back in Caleb's hand and stepped aside. I touched my jaw, tasting blood at the corner of my mouth. Caleb stood tall, puffed with drink and rage, waiting for me to swing back. But I didn't. I straightened, met his stare, and whispered words that came from somewhere deeper than pride. That punch didn't just bruise my jaw. It erased me from blood. The silence that followed was louder than any blow. My own family, people I'd driven hours to help, people whose lawns I'd mowed and debts I'd quietly covered, stood there and let me be discarded like garbage. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. I turned, walked past the scattered cookies, past the cousins who wouldn't look me in the eye, and stepped through the back gate without a look. Behind me, the party resumed in broken fragments, laughter too loud. Music turned up, someone muttering to fill the void I'd left. Ahead of me, the street was quiet, the air still heavy with summer heat. I pressed my hand to my swollen jaw and tasted the bitterness rising in my throat. That was the night I stopped being a brother and became a ghost, but ghosts have long memories. And as I walked toward my car, bleeding and silent, a question rooted itself deep inside me, one that would haunt the years to come. If family could cast me out so easily, who was I supposed to become without them? I left Charleston with nothing but a swollen jaw, a pocket of gas money, and a silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. My old pickup rattled down the highway for hours, each mile carrying me further from the backyard where I'd been erased. By the time I hit Houston, the engine was wheezing and I was running on fumes, both kinds. I parked behind a warehouse on the edge of town, curled up in the cab, and tried to convince myself that sleep on cracked vinyl seats was better than going back. Nights in that truck were long. The air was damp and the hum of the engine after a day's drive clung to me like a ghost. I wrapped my jacket tight, listening to the echo of my brother's voice, trash like it was etched into the steel around me. Some mornings I woke to condensation dripping down the windows, reminding me that the only warmth I had was my own breath. It didn't take long to find work. A warehouse needed night labor, no questions asked, cash in hand. I signed up, grateful even for that. The place reeked of dust, sweat, and oil. Forklifts screeched in the dark, and the foreman barked orders that cut sharper than the steel we hauled. My hands blistered on the first shift. By the third week, calluses spread across my palms, cracked and raw. Dinner was the same every night, a cup of instant noodles, salty and thin, chased with weak gas station coffee. I'd eat sitting on the curb outside the warehouse, watching other men climb into real cars to real homes. I chewed quickly, ashamed of the envy curling in my stomach. When the last styrofoam cup hit the trash, I'd climb back into my truck, my body sore, my spirit hollow, and tell myself tomorrow I'd be stronger. Then came the day the sun stole what little strength I had left. We were unloading shipments in the yard, no shade, just concrete baking beneath Texas heat. The air shimmered, my shirt clung like a second skin, and every breath felt like swallowing smoke. I remember gripping a box, the edges biting into my palms, and then the world tilted. The concrete rushed up faster than I could blink. I woke to harsh white light and the steady beep of a monitor. The room smelled of antiseptic and despair. My head pounded, my throat dry. A nurse leaned over me, her voice soft but heavy with concern. "Do you have someone we can call? Someone to pick you up?" Her words hung in the sterile air. For a moment I wanted to lie. I wanted to say a name, any name, just to pretend I wasn't alone. But the truth pressed harder than pride. My lips cracked as I whispered, "No one." She nodded gently like she'd heard it before, but for me, the sound of my own answer split something inside. I wasn't just struggling. I wasn't just poor. I was invisible. To the family I had bled for, driven miles for, fixed things for, I was already dead. When they released me, I walked back to the warehouse slowly, every step echoing with that truth. No one was waiting. No one cared if I came back or not. That night, lying in the cab of my truck, the hum of the city outside, I stared at the ceiling and felt the anger rising through the cracks of despair. I couldn't keep swallowing sons forever. And that's when the idea struck me, one desperate chance to see if there was still a thread left to grasp. Maybe a letter. Maybe words on paper could pierce the walls that fists and silence had built. I carried the echo of that hospital room with me for weeks. The nurse's gentle question, my own hollow reply, no one. It haunted me every night in that cramped cab of my truck. I told myself I was finished with family, finished with reaching for people who had already buried me. But silence, when it stretches long enough, starts to feel like a coffin lid. And one night, sitting at the rickety table of my rented room, I broke. I pulled out a cheap pen and a sheet of lined paper. My hands shook as I wrote the words I swore I wouldn't. I told Caleb I missed him. I didn't beg, not exactly. I just said maybe we could talk. Maybe not face to face, maybe not now, but sometime. I wrote that blood had to mean something even after fists and silence. When I folded the letter, slid it into the envelope, and scratched his name across the front, I felt a small pulse of hope. Not fire, not light, but a flicker like a match in the wind. I mailed it without a return address. If he wanted to, he'd find me. If not, I'd at least know. 3 weeks passed. I checked my mailbox like a starving man checks the pantry. Then one evening, under the dull glow of the hallway bulb, I found it. A plain white envelope, my name typed clean across the front. For a second, I imagined Caleb's handwriting inside, shaky but familiar. I tore it open with hands that trembled like they were holding glass. But it wasn't his handwriting. It wasn't even his words. The letter was typed cold, stripped of any trace of brotherhood. It was signed by Venus. She had intercepted him, or worse, spoken for him. Her words sliced deeper than Caleb's fist ever had. Cale, your inability to take accountability for the pain you've caused this family is exhausting. You weren't cut off. You just couldn't handle consequences. I read the line again and again, each time feeling the ground tilt further beneath me. To her, I wasn't a brother betrayed. I was a parasite, a ghost, a man who deserved silence. My eyes caught the last page. There wasn't Caleb's name, no sign he'd even seen my letter. But there was something else. Tucked inside was a glossy photograph. It was a family portrait. Caleb, Venus, their little boy, between them, smiling with the innocence only children have. The backdrop was a barbecue, the same kind of backyard scene I used to stand in. And I knew, without anyone telling me, that the place where the boy set Caleb's hand on his shoulder was the space where I once stood. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. My chest ached as though the fist had landed again, harder this time. Caleb hadn't just erased me, he had replaced me. I crumpled the photo, then smoothed it out again, caught between rage and despair. My apartment walls leaned and the dim bulb flickered and the silence pressed heavy. That letter wasn't closure. It was a burial. I left the envelope open on the table for hours, the words burning into me. I thought of mailing back a reply, pages of fury and truth. But what was the point? The door was closed, locked and barred from the other side. Caleb hadn't answered me. He hadn't even been allowed to. Or maybe worse, he didn't care enough to try. That night I stood by the window looking down at the streetlights. I wanted to scream, I wanted to smash the glass, but instead I whispered one promise into the dark. I won't die in silence. And with that, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Something sharper, something heavier. The seed of revenge, small but alive. Because if they wouldn't let me back into the family, then I'd build something they could never touch. I didn't know yet what shape it would take, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: their silence had ended. The letter from Venus still burned in my chest long after I crumpled it in my fist. Her words were sharp as glass, slicing deeper than Caleb's punch ever had. I stood on my narrow balcony, the air heavy with the scent of car exhaust and faint jasmine from a neighbor's window box. The city hummed below me, but I barely heard it. I tore the letter into strips, each piece catching the humid night breeze, scattering into the dark like ashes from a funeral pyre. That wasn't closure. That was a burial, and I was done grieving. Inside my apartment was silent except for the rattle of an old air conditioner. I pulled the battered laptop from the corner of the room. Its surface chipped the fan, whining as it powered on. The glow from the screen lit my face, and for the first time in years I felt something shift. If they had written me off as nothing, then I would build something from nothing. Not for their approval, not for forgiveness, but to prove that silence could be answered with fire. I found free coding tutorials on YouTube, the voices of strangers teaching me loops, functions, and syntax. It looked like another language entirely, one designed to make me fail. And fail I did. The first week, nothing worked. I mistyped, misunderstood, crashed the machine so often I thought it would give up before I did. But every error message lit a fuse in me. Each failure felt better than that suffocating silence I had lived in for 11 years. Sometimes when the frustration clawed at me, I'd glance at the mailbox downstairs through the window. I remembered waiting by it every day, hoping for Caleb's reply, until Venus's letter came instead. I'd see that memory like a phantom, her envelope in my trembling hands. The photo tucked inside of their smiling family, their child standing where I used to belong. That vision taunted me, telling me to quit, to admit they were right. But every time I thought of giving in, I pressed harder on the keys. Nights blurred together. Coffee cups stacked up on the counter, ramen packets littered the floor. My hands ached from typing, calluses splitting under the strain. I worked warehouse shifts until dawn, then dragged myself home to the glowing screen. The balcony became my fortress, the glow of the laptop my only firelight. Cars passed below, lovers argued, radios blared, but I stayed locked in coding until my eyes burned. One night, rain began to fall, soft at first, then hammering the roof like a war drum. I pulled the laptop closer under the shelter of the overhang, my shirt sticking to my back with sweat. My heart pounded with each keystroke. The command line blinked at me, daring me to try one more time. I hit enter. For a second, nothing. Then across the screen, 2 words appeared, simple, plain, glowing against the black hello world. I leaned back in my chair, water dripping from the railing, my chest heaving. For a moment, I forgot the warehouse, the hunger, the letter. I even forgot Caleb's fist. All I saw was proof that I wasn't powerless. My voice cracked as I whispered to the night. They gave me silence. I answered with fire. That was the first spark, and sparks spread if you fed them. I didn't know then how far it would go, how much it would consume, or who it would burn in the end. I only knew that I wasn't going back. And as the rain poured harder, I stared at the flickering screen and asked myself one question: if I could teach a machine to speak, what else could I build from the ashes they left me? The letter was gone, shredded and carried away by the night wind. But the fire it lit inside me refused to fade. That night on the balcony had been the spark. What followed were the endless nights of grinding, nights where silence grew heavier than sleep, nights where my body begged for rest, but my pride refused to surrender. If the letter had buried me, then this was my resurrection, clawing back inch by inch with nothing but a flickering laptop and the stubborn will to prove I wasn't the trash they named me. The apartment was suffocating in its smallness. The peeling paint on the walls seemed to lean closer with each passing day, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only constant companion I had. My nights blurred into mornings fueled by cheap coffee that left a bitter aftertaste on my tongue and hands that shook with exhaustion. The laptop wheezed every time I opened a new program, its fan rattling like bones in a coffin. But I pushed it harder than I pushed myself. I wrote code until my vision blurred. Line after line after line. And each one mocked me. Red error messages bled across the screen like wounds that refused to close. Sometimes I slammed my fist on the desk. Sometimes I just stared hollow and defeated at the blinking cursor as if it too judged me. I must have written 100 programs that went nowhere, each collapse echoing the chorus of my brother's voice in my skull trash. His wife's sneer, worthless. Their laughter from that backyard still rang louder than the city traffic outside my window. There were moments I nearly quit. More than once I hovered over the power button, ready to shut the damn thing for good, ready to let the silence swallow me whole again. But every time my eyes drifted to that one photo stuck under the edge of the mirror, my family lined up, Caleb in the center, his wife clinging to his arm. The space where I once stood filled now with his son. My place erased, rewritten like I had never existed. That image seared me awake more than any caffeine ever could. It whispered, if you stop, they win. So I didn't stop. I poured another cup of stale coffee, ignored the pounding in my chest, and went back to the code. My fingers trembled on the keyboard, nails cracked, wrists sore. Failure became my routine, but each failure carved me sharper, harder. Every bug I couldn't fix became another insult I swallowed and turned to fuel. I told myself pain is temporary, revenge lasts longer. Then one night, after what felt like the 1,000th attempt, I hit run. The cursor blinked, the laptop groaned. And then there it was. On the black screen in stark white letters, 2 words appeared, "Hello World." For a second I thought it was another trick, another failure mocking me. But it stayed. It was real. My chest tightened, and before I knew it, laughter broke out of me, cracked and wet with tears. I slammed my fist down, not in anger this time, but triumph. "Take that, Venus," I whispered, my voice trembling with the weight of everything behind it. That small, simple success was nothing to anyone else, but to me it was proof. Proof that I could build, proof that I could outlast the silence they left me in. I wasn't erased. Not anymore. Each keystroke after that felt lighter, faster, like I'd finally found my weapon. Not fists, not words code. They had tried to bury me, but I had dug out with nothing but grit and broken keys. Still, even in victory, the shadows lingered. The coffee pot was empty. My body trembled with hunger and fatigue. I leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling of my room, hearing the hum of the old laptop. For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled hope. But hope can be fragile. As I wiped my eyes and set my fingers back on the keyboard, the screen flickered once, just once, as though the machine itself doubted I could keep pushing it this far. And in that brief blackout, my heart raced with a new thought: if this laptop died, would I die with it? I remember the first time I thought maybe I could build something of my own. The endless nights of code coffee and failure had led me here to a shabby kitchen table stacked with notebooks and a laptop that wheezed like it was breathing its last. But on that flickering screen, after months of frustration, I had stitched together a simple warehouse management app. It wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. For a man who'd been called trash, it felt like gold. I showed it one afternoon to my old supervisor at the shipping yard, a man who'd once handed me extra shifts when I could barely stand. His eyes widened as he clicked through the screens. "You built this yourself?" he asked, disbelief giving way to something else, respect. When I nodded, he leaned back silent for a long moment, then said, "There's someone you need to meet." That sentence carried more weight than I realized at the time. Within a week, I found myself walking into a logistics company's office dressed in a blazer that had seen better decades. My palms were damp, my shoes scuffed, but I carried the app on a thumb drive like it was a weapon. The receptionist barely glanced at me before directing me to a conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier ink. Sitting across the table was a recruiter whose expression was both weary and sharp. He asked questions that cut deep into the code, the design, the usability. I answered honestly, sometimes clumsily, but without excuses. Then came the twist. As he flipped through my resume, he said almost offhandedly, "Funny thing, I think I met a Hayes before. Caleb Hayes, right? Your brother." My heart kicked against my ribs. He went on without waiting for my answer. "Yeah, I remember. He pitched us an idea years back. Polished, flashy, but it fell apart the minute we asked real questions." He set the resume down, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not like him, are you?" I felt the old wound throb, the echo of Caleb's fist, Venus's laughter. I looked the man square in the eye. "No, I don't fold when it gets real." He stared for a beat longer, then leaned back and chuckled. "You're rough, but you're real. We can work with that." Those words cut deeper than Caleb's insults ever had. Not because they hurt, but because they healed something I thought was gone. For the first time since I'd been cast out, someone on the outside had seen me as valuable. I walked out of that building with a small job offer, junior level, modest pay. But my hands trembled as I held the paper. To me, it wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof that I had clawed my way back from nothing, that I wasn't the trash Caleb had branded me. The blazer still smelled like mothballs, the shoes still pinched, but I walked taller than I had in years. That night, I sat in my cramped apartment staring at the paper contract and the flickering screen of my laptop. For the first time in over a decade, the silence in the room didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. Yet in the back of my mind, I could still hear Caleb's voice, still see Venus's smirk. They had dismissed me, erased me. Now I was starting to write my own script. As I placed the signed contract on the counter, I whispered into the empty room, "This is just the beginning." What I didn't know was that the next beginning would arrive faster than I could imagine, and it would come wearing the familiar face of someone from my past, someone who held the keys to an empire I hadn't yet dreamed of. Austin was nothing like the dusty warehouse floors I had known for years. The city pulsed with energy, neon lights bleeding into the night sky, and streets crowded with men and women in polished suits carrying sleek laptops. I was there because the logistics firm that had taken a chance on me wanted exposure at the big tech conference. For them, it was marketing. For me, it was another test. I stepped into the convention center with a thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs. My shoes pinched, the laces frayed, but my ID badge hanging from my neck said something I had never imagined years before: software engineer. I repeated those two words under my breath as I walked through aisles lined with booths from giants like IBM and Oracle. For the first time in over a decade, I felt like I was walking in a place I belonged, but the ghost of Caleb's punch and Venus's laughter still followed me. I was grabbing a paper cup of lukewarm coffee when I heard a voice call my name. It wasn't my manager or some stranger mispronouncing Daniel. It was Dante Marshall. We had gone to high school together back when I was the quiet kid who wrote bad poems and fixed old computers in the library. Dante had been a loudmouth, a dreamer who never seemed to take life seriously. But the man standing before me now was different. His suit fit like it was made for him. His watch gleamed and his handshake was firm. "Daniel Hayes," he said, smiling wide. "Didn't think I'd ever see you in a place like this." His words weren't cruel, they were surprised, maybe even impressed. We ducked into a cafe on the corner away from the endless pitches and PowerPoints, the smell of roasted beans mixed with the buzz of entrepreneurs whispering about venture rounds. Dante leaned across the table, eyes sharp. He had built 2 startups, failed one, sold another. Now he was scouting for his third, an AI-driven logistics platform. "We're trying to change the way goods move across the country," he said. "But I don't just want code monkeys. I want someone who knows what it feels like to bleed for something. Someone who's lived the grind." He sipped his espresso, then fixed his gaze on me. "That's you, Daniel. Pain built you, and that's exactly the edge we need." For a long moment I just stared at him. The words stirred something deep inside, but fear drowned it out. I thought about the risks, about nights spent hungry, about failure, eating away at whatever scraps of pride I had built back. "I can't," I muttered. "I've just started standing on my own. I can't afford to fall again." Dante didn't push. He just nodded, slid his card across the table and said, "Call me when you're ready. Opportunities don't wait." I left the cafe with the card burning a hole in my pocket. That night in my cheap hotel room, I turned the card over and over in my hand, wrestling with the decision. The hum of the city outside the window was a reminder of how far I had come, but also how far I still had to go. I almost threw the card into the trash, but then fate intervened. The radio in the lobby was playing an interview, Caleb's voice unmistakable. He was being featured for some local business panel back in Charleston. I froze listening. He bragged about his resilience, about how he had lifted his family out of hardship. My blood boiled. He was telling the world a lie I had lived the price for. At that moment, something snapped. I wasn't the boy he punched in the backyard anymore. I wasn't the starving man in a truck. I was Daniel Hayes, and I had built myself out of ashes. I picked up Dante's card and whispered, "Pain built me. Let's build with it." The next morning I called him. His tone was calm but expectant, like he knew I'd come around. "I knew you'd say yes," Dante said. "Welcome aboard." With that, I stepped into the world of startups, not just to build software, but to carve out an empire that no betrayal could touch. But little did I know, the higher I climbed, the more shadows from my past would find new ways to drag me down. And one day those shadows would knock on the door of my mansion. The day the contract came through the office was electric. Our little startup, once just an idea, scribbled on Dante's napkin. And my late nights hunched over a flickering screen had landed its first multi-million-dollar deal. I stood in the middle of the glass-walled conference room, sunlight spilling across the table, watching as executives twice my age shook my hand with genuine respect. Their suits were sharper, their shoes more polished, but for the first time I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like the one holding the keys. From there, everything accelerated. Our platform, driven by AI, refined by grit, reshaped how goods moved across the country. Trucks cut routes in half. Warehouses ran smoother than ever. Numbers don't lie, and the numbers told the world that Daniel Hayes, the man who once slept in a truck behind a warehouse, was now at the helm of something unstoppable. The board named me CEO. I signed the papers with a pen that didn't shake. and for once my reflection in the polished glass of the office looked like a man I almost recognized. Success has a sound. For me, it was the hum of the servers in our headquarters, the steady tick of the stock ticker climbing higher, the click of champagne glasses when we closed another deal. But success also has a taste, and I savored it most when I signed for the deed of my oceanfront mansion in San Diego. The walls gleamed white, the balconies stretched wide toward the sea, and for the first time in years, I had a home that wasn't borrowed or broken. The first night I stood on that balcony, the ocean stretched endless before me, waves crashing against the cliffs below. The salt air wrapped around me, and in its chill I felt the ghost of another night long ago. The memory of sleeping in the cab of my truck, shivering under a torn blanket, hunger gnawing at me, while Caleb's laughter echoed in my head. I gripped the railing, now strong and steady, and whispered to the wind, "Every scar built these walls." The house wasn't just brick, steel, and glass. It was proof that I had outlived their judgment, that I had clawed my way from silence to power. I walked the halls still bare of furniture and let my footsteps echo. Each sound told me the same truth: I survived, and survival was just the beginning. I remember running my hand along the polished marble in the entryway, whispering words no one else could hear. This house isn't just bricks. It's proof I survived. The mansion became my fortress, a monument to resilience, to the revenge that had fueled me through every sleepless night. And yet, even as I settled into success, I knew shadows don't vanish. They wait. Because when you build something this high, the past always finds a way to knock at your gates. And one evening, as the sun dipped into the Pacific, turning the sky blood red, I heard the sound I had been waiting for without even realizing it. A knock at the mansion gate, steady, insistent, and all too familiar. The ocean was calm that evening, but the sky burned with the red of a dying sun. I stood on the balcony of the mansion, watching the waves strike the cliffs when the intercom crackled to life. My gate camera lit up, and on the screen, two faces I hadn't seen in more than a decade stared back at me. Caleb and Venus side by side, their smiles stretched thin, each gripping a suitcase as though they were weary travelers returning home. My gut tightened. They weren't travelers. They were invaders. I walked slowly to the front gate, my footsteps echoing in the wide marble halls. The mansion was silent except for the steady hum of the sea outside, but inside me, the past roared. When the gate slid open, I was met with Caleb's grin, too wide, too rehearsed. Venus's eyes scanned the property behind me, as if she was already measuring curtains. They looked older, worn down by years I couldn't account for, but the arrogance in their faces was unchanged. Daniel Caleb said, his voice warm, practiced. He held something in his hand, and when he extended it, the light caught on the metal. It was our father's watch, the same one that had fallen to the ground the night he punched me out of the family. "Thought maybe this belongs with you now," he said, his tone dripping with false sentiment. It wasn't a gift. It was bait. Venus stepped forward, her smile too polished to be sincere. "We just thought, maybe it's time. Families fight, but families also heal." Her voice was smooth, but I remembered her words in that letter, the poison she had poured into every line. I remembered the photo of their son standing in my place. Now here she was, standing at my gate, pretending the past had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. I said nothing. I didn't move to take the watch. I let the silence stretch until Caleb shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and the memory of betrayal. Caleb broke first. He lifted the suitcases slightly and said, "Family's family. We just need a place just until we get back on our feet." His words were casual, but I could hear the desperation beneath them. My chest tightened not from pity but from fury, the audacity of him standing there after 11 years of silence, after calling me trash and erasing me from blood, and now he dared to ask for shelter. I remembered the warehouse nights, the hunger that hollowed me out, the letter that buried me alive. They hadn't cared then. Why should I care now? I looked Caleb dead in the eye and finally spoke. My voice was steady, colder than the ocean wind. You disowned me. You don't get to rewrite history. The words hung between us, sharp and final. Venus's smile cracked and Caleb's face reddened, the mask slipping just enough to show the man who had once swung his fist at me in front of everyone. He tried to laugh, a weak, forced sound. Come on, Daniel. Don't be like that. We're family. We can make this right. But I saw the twitch in his jaw, the flash of anger buried under that false humility. Venus placed a hand on his arm, but her eyes never left the mansion behind me. Hungry, calculating. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue, I simply stepped back. Let the weight of the silence press down on them and closed the gate. The metal groaned as it shut, the lock sliding into place with a finality that echoed in my bones. On the other side, I could hear Caleb's muffled curses and Venus's hissed reprimands, but their words didn't touch me. Not anymore. I turned away, the watch still gleaming in Caleb's hand on the other side of the gate, and walked back into the mansion. The halls swallowed me, the sound of the sea rising once more. For a moment I thought it was over, that they would turn, retreat, and disappear into the night. But as I reached the balcony again and looked out into the fading light, I saw their silhouettes still standing at the gate, unmoving, waiting. They hadn't come to visit, they had come to play a game, and deep down I knew this was only the beginning. The night after I closed the gate on them, I thought the matter was finished. I believed Caleb and Venus would lick their wounds and vanish like shadows chased away by the morning sun. But I underestimated them. Some people don't retreat when the door slams shut, they sharpen their knives. And Caleb and Venus were sharpening theirs. At first their presence lingered at the edges, a text message from an unknown number. We just want to talk. A voicemail with Venus's syrupy voice insisting family can heal Daniel. I deleted them, each one a mosquito buzzing in my ear. Then came the unexpected knock at my kitchen door one morning. I opened it to find no one, just a small flash drive in an envelope taped to the handle. I tossed it on the counter thinking it was junk. Later that night when I plugged it into my laptop, my stomach dropped. The drive contained footage from my own mansion's security system, clips, spliced together, cut and stitched with sinister precision. On the screen, it looked as though I had grabbed Venus by the arm, shoved her, shouted at her. The audio was warped, my voice twisted into anger that wasn't mine. It was a fabrication, but it was seamless enough that strangers online wouldn't know the difference. I closed the laptop with shaking hands, bile rising in my throat. They hadn't just come to beg, they had come to destroy. Within days, the video hit the internet. A viral storm erupted, hashtags with my name, accusations of abuse, comments dripping with outrage from people who had never met me. I scrolled through them in disbelief, each word a knife. Trash like him never changes. Power just makes abusers stronger. My chest tightened with rage. They had stolen my silence once. Now they were stealing my reputation. But Venus wasn't finished. She had always been more cunning than Caleb, her cruelty wrapped in silk. Using her old connections, she forged an email chain that looked like it came from me. Messages that hinted at laundering money through the company accounts. She sent them to my bank, my investors, and even the press. One morning, while standing in the kitchen with the smell of burnt coffee in the air, I opened my banking app and saw the words that nearly froze my blood: account temporarily restricted pending investigation. The walls of the mansion suddenly felt like a cage. I slammed my phone on the counter glass, cracking under the force. "She's not just cruel," I muttered, voice low and shaking with fury. "She's dangerous." The reflection in the kitchen window showed a man I barely recognized. Jaw-tight eyes burning, no longer the boy who once begged for scraps of affection. I was staring at a man who had been pushed too far. I paced the kitchen, the roar of the ocean outside matching the roar inside me. They thought they could erase me again just like before, but this time I had more than hunger and hope on my side. I had power, resources, and the will to fight back. The world might believe their lies for now, but I had the truth. And truth wielded at the right time could burn hotter than any lie. I picked up the cracked phone, scrolling through contacts until I found one name I hadn't used in years. A lawyer who owed me a favor. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I didn't press it yet. Instead, I looked back at the kitchen table where the flash drive still sat. Proof that they had crossed the line, proof that could bury them if I played it right. The mansion was silent except for the waves crashing below, but I could feel the storm gathering. I tightened my grip on the phone, finally pressing the call. As it rang, a thought pulsed in my chest, steady as a drumbeat. If Caleb and Venus wanted war, I was going to give them one. And as my lawyer's voice came through the line, calm and steady, I realized the next move wouldn't just clear my name, it would set the stage for their ruin. The waves crashed against the cliffs outside my office window, steady and relentless, as though the ocean itself mirrored the storm rising inside me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, the glow of the screen casting a pale light across the dark wood desk. On the corner sat the cracked phone from days ago. A reminder of how close I had come to breaking. But tonight wasn't about breaking. Tonight was about fighting back. I reached under the desk and pulled out the hard drive I had hidden years ago. Back when I was learning to code, I had developed a habit of saving everything. Every test file, every camera feed, every scrap of data that might one day prove useful. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. And now that survival instinct was about to turn into a weapon. The drive whirred to life as I plugged it in. Folders opened, rows of time-stamped videos stacked neatly like soldiers waiting for orders. My heart pounded as I clicked through them until I found what I needed, the uncut recordings from the mansion's cameras, untouched, unedited, undeniable. With trembling fingers, I uploaded the files not just to my lawyer, but to 3 independent journalists and 2 tech forums that prided themselves on debunking digital fraud. Within hours, the tide turned. The raw footage streamed online side by side with the doctored version Caleb and Venus had released. Anyone with eyes could see the truth. The cuts, the distortions, the lies, they all unraveled under the weight of reality. But the final blow wasn't just in the fake. It was in the overlooked fragments. My system had captured Venus on a late-night call, leaning against her car outside my gates. Her voice sharp and unguarded. "Let him take the fall," she told the man on the other end, her tone dripping with calculation. "His brother's money is our safety net anyway." The words landed like a hammer. News outlets replayed that clip over and over, each repetition striking Caleb like another punch. I imagined him sitting in some motel room watching his empire of deceit collapse in real time, seeing his wife, his shield, his co-conspirator exposed as faithless and manipulative. For the first time, Caleb's silence spoke louder than his arrogance ever had. Back in my office, I leaned forward, staring into the screen as comments poured in beneath the videos. Strangers who had cursed my name days before were now apologizing, admitting they had been duped. Others ripped into Venus, labeling her a fraud, a predator. And Caleb, once the golden boy who had erased me with a fist and a word, was dragged down with her. Their credibility shattered in hours. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, steadying myself. This wasn't joy, not exactly. It was vindication. It was proof that truth, no matter how long buried, could still rise like fire through ash. They tried to bury me. I whispered, voice low and steady. They forgot I keep receipts. The room was still save for the roar of the ocean beyond the glass. I turned away from the screen, my reflection faint against the window. For a moment I saw not the boy who once starved in slunts, but the man who had clawed his way back to the light. The revenge wasn't just about them anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. And yet, even in victory, a shadow lingered. Caleb and Venus had been cornered, but cornered animals don't always retreat. They lash out. The phone on my desk buzzed with a new message, the sender unknown. The words short and sharp, "This isn't over." I stared at it, the glow of the screen cold against my skin, and felt the storm rising again. The proof had burned them, but the final reckoning was still waiting at my gates. The driveway was empty when the sun began to sink, painting the ocean in streaks of orange and crimson. For the first time in weeks, the mansion stood in silence. Caleb and Venus were gone, leaving behind nothing but a battered suitcase by the gate and a stench of desperation that still clung to the air. I should have felt relief, but the truth was heavier, thicker. Revenge never comes clean. It always leaves residue. The proof I had released scorched them publicly. Investors pulled out of Caleb's ventures, banks froze his accounts, and his name, once wrapped in false polish, became mud. Even Evelyn, my mother, couldn't protect him this time. For years she had chosen silence, but silence no longer shielded him. She called me that night, her voice weary but steady. "Daniel," she said, "your brother has nothing left. His wife. She's gone too. Maybe now's the time to show mercy." I gripped the phone tighter, listening to the waves strike the rocks below. Her plea was familiar, but the woman who spoke wasn't. There was no softness, no pleading, only resignation. "Blood didn't stand up for me when I needed it most," I replied quietly. The pause on the other end stretched long before she answered. "Then maybe blood doesn't deserve to." It was the closest thing to taking my side I had ever heard her say. The next morning, a lawyer delivered documents to my office. Venus had filed for divorce, citing Caleb's financial ruin and irreconcilable differences. Along with it, evidence surfaced that she had been siphoning money into secret accounts long before their fall. Her betrayal wasn't subtle, it was deliberate, precise, almost surgical. Caleb had lost his fortune, his reputation, and now his wife. The man who once called me trash was left with nothing but ashes. Later that week, I found a small package waiting on my doorstep. No return address, no note. Inside lay the old pocket watch, my father's. The same watch Caleb had tried to use as bait at my gate. But this time it wasn't polished, wasn't a symbol of pride. It was scratched, dented, and wrapped in a crumpled napkin. For a long moment I stood in the entryway, the weight of it heavy in my palm. That watch had once been Caleb's weapon. Now it was his surrender. I didn't wear it. I carried it into the study and placed it on a shelf high above my desk, where it caught the late light of the setting sun. Not a prize, not a trophy, just a relic of a past that no longer chained me. That evening, as the tide rose, I stepped onto the balcony and let the wind whip through my shirt. The sea was restless, waves crashing harder than usual, as if echoing the storm that had finally broken. I thought about Caleb sitting alone in some motel room, stripped of everything he had used to measure his worth. I thought about Venus starting fresh with the money she had stolen, her betrayal cutting as deep as the one she had once inflicted on me. And I thought about Evelyn, who had finally spoken the words I needed years ago, even if they came too late. They thought they broke me, I whispered into the dusk, the horizon burning red. All they did was build my walls higher. The words tasted like iron, sharp and final. The mansion loomed behind me, its glass walls gleaming with the reflection of the sea. Every brick, every scar in my body, every betrayal, it was all here, standing solid against the years they tried to erase me. I leaned on the railing, breathing deep, and let a single thought settle in: survival is the sweetest revenge. The phone buzzed in my pocket, a message, unknown number. I opened it. Just 5 words. You won the battle, not the war. My jaw tightened, but I didn't reply. For the first time, the threat didn't shake me. Because gates don't just keep people out, they keep strength in. I turned, leaving the balcony, my footsteps echoing through the marble halls. The watch glimmered faintly on the shelf, catching the last light of day. Blood didn't make family. Loyalty did. And if there was another reckoning waiting beyond the horizon, I was ready. Because this time the gate would stay closed. I've told you my story, from a punch that erased me to nights starving in silence, to building walls higher than anyone thought I could climb. I kept receipts, and when the time came, I proved that betrayal never wins in the long run. My brother called me trash, his wife spat in my face, and they both left me for dead. But I rose, I built something they could never touch. And when they came crawling back, begging at my gates, I didn't argue. I didn't forgive. I chose peace on my own terms. If my story struck a chord, if you felt the sting of betrayal or the satisfaction of justice, then I invite you. Subscribe, leave a comment, share your own story. Because stories like this aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever been cast out, anyone who's ever had to fight their way back. And now I'll leave you with one question, the same question I still ask myself when I hear the ocean at night when blood betrays you: is shutting the gate enough justice? Or should revenge demand more?